Hello, everyone. I welcome you with the Islamic greeting, Assalamu alaikum. May the peace and blessings of God be upon you. My name is Sue Obeidi, and I am the director of the Muslim Public Affairs Council's Hollywood Bureau, MPAC for short. We work in the industry to change the narrative around Muslims and Islam. For more information on who we are and what we do, please visit our venue, the Muslim House, on the festival website. Welcome to a new narrative, Championing Authentic Black Muslim Stories panel, hosted by Macro and MPAC. On behalf of the staff and board of MPAC, I'd like to thank Macro's Stacy Walker King and Charles King for all they do to elevate the voices of underrepresented communities and for their partnership today. I'd also like to thank Macro's Keisha Booz for her coordination on today's panel. I'd also like to thank the staff and board of the Sundance Film Festival for their tireless work and for overcoming so many challenges as they organized the festival during the pandemic. The entertainment industry is the most powerful industry there is. Unfortunately, entertainment and news media have been very guilty in fanning the flames of injustice towards Black communities. Additionally, the Black Muslim community is the largest Muslim community in America, yet Muslim narratives are sorely missing on TV and film. And this is why today's discussion is so vital. Our panelists, Qasim Basir, Najla Mu'min, and Malik Aziz are at the forefront of narrative change, and we thank them for their contribution and participation today. And with that, I am honored to introduce you to our moderator, Stacy Walker King.
Hello, I'm Stacy Walker King. I'm Chief Brand Officer of Macro. Welcome to the Macro Lodge at the Sundance Film Festival 2021. We created this lodge to have the conversations that matter, that push culture forward, that ask the important questions and seek the necessary answers. And this panel is no exception to that. I am so proud to present the new narratives, Championing Authentic Black Muslim Stories in partnership with the Muslim Public Affairs Council. I want to first introduce my three incredible panelists for this. First, I have Malik Aziz. He is an actor, screenwriter, and producer. His last film, 1 out of 30, was produced by AT&T and Hillman Grad. Also, his screenplay, Midnight in Kansas, was selected in the 2019 Urban World Film Festival. Welcome, Malik.
Welcome, thank you for having me.
I also have Najla Mu'min. She's an award-winning writer and filmmaker. I'm gonna be so excited saying award-winning behind all of your names because it's true. Award-winning writer and filmmaker. Filmmaker Magazine named her one of the 25 new faces of independent film in 2017. Her debut feature film, Jen, premiered at the South by Southwest Film Festival in 2018 and won a special jury recognition award for screenwriting. Welcome, Najla.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And lastly, I have Qasim Basir. Qasim is a writer, filmmaker, most known for his film, A Boy, a Girl, a Dream, about the night of the 2016 presidential election. His first film was NAACP Image Award nominated Muslim, which starred Nia Long, Evan Ross, and Danny Glover. He is also award winning, and the LA Times has called his films well crafted in every aspect. And he's gained international momentum, opening in 25 countries. Welcome, Qasim.
Thank you for that intro. Glad to be here.
Thank you. One thing that I want to say as we talk about championing Black Muslim stories and narratives, you're all image makers, you're filmmakers, you're storytellers. I want to talk about, just from your own personal journeys, the first images you remember seeing that were reflective of your identities and how that informed your entrance into this industry. Let's start with you, Malik.
As a kid, I always loved movies and television. I remember, I'm showing my age a little bit, but I remember The Goonies, and I remember like Family Ties, and I grew up, just kind of enjoying E.T., Spielberg, liking a lot of kids stuff, but between the time frame and also growing up in Kansas, it just never occurred to me as like a career choice or even like any kind of path like that. Then Spike Lee came along, and it was like, oh, okay, so there is a Black person. At this point, I hadn't heard of Oscar Micheaux or didn't know the history at that point. But it was like, oh, a Black person is making films. That's interesting. And not too long after that, John Singleton made Boys in the Hood. And one of my most vivid memories is my father taking me to Boys in the Hood. And it was both a great film, obviously, but also bonding experience. And that was when I felt like, okay, this is something I have a passion for. It's something I want to do. I remember having like the old school video cameras and shooting my friends playing basketball and just developing that passion for it. Still in Kansas at this time. So through grace, I was accepted into USC. That brought me to LA, and that is part of when the film school part kind of kicked in and when like the craft kicked in. So those were the images in terms of being Black. Now, in terms of being Muslim, I've seen many international films, but in terms of being a Black Muslim, it is just like very scarce. Malcolm X is obviously the film that would come to mind for us. Now, the book is still like the most influential book of my life, but I remember even that movie, which is a Spike movie, and Denzel, and seeing these images, it's just like, oh wow, this is like amazing, and this speaks to me. But that was 95 though. So you think, it's been, oh wow, 20 something years, and there's just like still, in terms of Black Muslims, not enough. And even just as a Muslim in general, we've only had, I remember when Rami first came out a couple of years ago, and that the Muslim community it was just such a huge reaction. Not that, Rami is a perfect character. I mean, he'll be the first one to tell you that, but just, oh wait, there's a reference to Ramadan. He's referencing fasting. He's referencing just all these things, which are very specific to us, and just having just something in the mainstream world that was working. I mean, it's working and it's getting critical acclaim, and that made me personally think of, okay, why don't I dig deeper into not just my identity as a Black man, but my identity as a Black Muslim man. And so that led to 1 out of 30, which was meant to be just a small thing. I wrote it with the intention I was just going to get together with my friends and shoot something really quick. It ended up on the radar of much bigger companies, as you referenced, and it became a bigger film, and I'm very blessed for that. Midnight in Kansas was a similar situation where it was a small, very personal story that I felt like I needed to tell, and took it to Urban World in 2019, won the Urban World Best Screenplay, and that's put me on the radar of people. So it's an interesting thing to say that my passion and my desire to tell these images of my people is always there. But even for me, I've needed, and I think that's what we're here to do. We all need to don't always need to see somebody, but you need that confidence that, okay, if I tell my own story, if I speak to my own community, I know there's an audience for it, but will other people react to it? Because that's pretty much any artist. You don't have to speak to any, but it's that self-conscious of, this is important to me, but will this be important to other people? Will other people relate to it in the same way? So I'm glad, and feel like the confidence is there now. I've gotten enough validation to say, okay, you know what? Please keep telling your stories. We need more. We need you to speak fully to your identity, and we need you to speak fully to what it means to be a Black Muslim. And I'm very happy to do it.
Nigella, how about you?
Well, growing up in the Bay Area, I read a lot. I was into novels and books, a lot of them that weren't for my age group. So I was reading like Terry McMillan novels and the autobiography of Malcolm X and Danzy Senna novels, and just anything I could get my hands on that showed contemporary representations of Black life. And, my age group, older people, like I was just into the internal world of Blackness. And I think that sometimes was not reflected on television or film. So I looked to books to really immerse myself in that. I also wrote a lot of poetry. That was a way that I was making sense of my own identity at the time and my own family dynamics. And I still write poetry and prose and essays to this day. Some of the first films that really spoke to me, I would say Love and Basketball, directed by Gina Prince Bythewood, who's amazing. Just seeing a Black girl who's a tomboy, who's just committed to, you know, basketball and to her family, and, you know, this developing love story was just something that I found beautiful at the time, and that I found myself in a way. I also love like The Five Heartbeats by Robert Townsend. I love music films. I loved how complicated each of those characters were. I remember my father taking me to see Malcolm X, directed by Spike Lee, at the big theater in Oakland, and seeing how the audience responded, crying and clapping and yelling Alhamdulillah. And I just knew at that point, whatever art I made, I wanted to have that type of impact on people. I want to make evocative, emotional art. And I'm an emotional person, so I just want that to come through. And I think Spike Lee is a great example of art that just evokes emotions in people, the division in people, controversy, like all that I just loved. So yeah, those are some of the first kind of things that spoke to me.
Yes, Nigel, I feel like you just gave the COVID like Black movie playlist. I'm like writing them all down that I need to go back and watch each and every one of those. Yeah. Qasim, I'd love for you to answer that question too, just about your, you know, kind of early inspirations and what really sparked for you in terms of seeing yourself.
Yeah, for sure. So to see myself, it's strange because growing up Black and Muslim, you're kind of living in two worlds, or at least I was, you know. I'm in the neighborhood with, you know, all the Black kids who are just sort of a little separate because they're all going to the same church. And, you know, there's just certain customs and traditions that they practice that I didn't, you know, and it was always sort of this thing, you know. But then going to the mosque and being around that community. So I grew up around a lot of Black people and also around a lot of Arab and Pakistani and, you know, people. So, which are completely different customs a lot of times. So like I found myself in this sort of back and forth kind of world. And then when it came to film, so it would sort of be a similar thing with film. So like for the sort of Black part of me, which is kind of everywhere, all through me, I would see films like Boys in the Hood and Menace and, you know, watch A Different World in those shows that just really resonated with me and I really loved and appreciated. You know, Martin, I wasn't, and the thing is I wasn't allowed to watch a lot of things. So I would have to like sneak to friends' houses and watch it. And, you know, when kids were talking about Martin at the bus stop the next morning, I never was able to like be up on the jokes because I never was able to watch it on time. But that like sort of increased my want to watch things, the fact that I wasn't allowed to. So when I did get to watch it, it meant a lot more to me. So I think the most impactful thing, I'm gonna bite off Nigel a bit here because Malcolm X was it for me, man. I've never had an experience like that in my life. When I went to see that film, I went with my uncle, rest in peace, he passed last year. My uncle Gary and my father and my cousins and my brother, we all went to the theater and we were all kids. And, you know, we just sat there with our mouths open and our eyes fixed on the screen, just seeing these images that we had never seen before. And then I would not see again until, you know, and which is what led me to start making movies with those types of characters. And that was a big reason, is that while trying to negotiate these two sides of me, the Black person, the Muslim person, which now sort of live as one, but while trying to understand it in a society where your parents are like doing this thing almost for the first, I feel like we were kind of the first large generation of Black people to be raised Muslim in America, you know, which, and you're going to public school and you're trying to sort of navigate that and figure out what that means. It built a lot of stories within my consciousness and And when it came to making my first movie, that's the story that I wanted to tell. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, you know what? I want to touch on something that you just said about two worlds, because I see that so much it is a through line in all of your work. I won't say in all of the work that you do, but I said in all three of you in some of the projects that you have, where I see there's this theme of something where it's so universal. A young woman like doing something to please her parents, or a young couple, their love story, or someone going to college. You have that in your stories, but then in Muslim, it's a Muslim boy going to college right after 9/11. In 1 out of 30, it's a love story about a young couple right on the first day of Ramadan. And then in Jinn, it's a young woman converting to Islam. So I think there is just something that is so fascinating about it, is there's a universal thread that we can all relate to, but it's told through this, I think like the lens of a Black Muslim identity sort of lens. And I kind of want to talk to you a little bit about just, I think, how that, when you were creating those stories, was that something that you were like, knowingly doing? Was it something that you were like, you felt either a responsibility to like, you needed to tell this story? I'm just curious about that, like two worlds kind of aspect, if you can speak to that, in your work.
Well, what's funny? I guess because in a lot of ways, it's just like life to me. It wasn't something that was like a very conscious effort of, okay, I'm always a Black Muslim, but I know these people may not automatically see that all the time. So it was funny when 1 out of 30 was finished, I showed it to a friend of mine, because a part of that movie takes place in corporate America, like when he goes to work, basically the main character. And I wrote it based on my experience, but when a friend of mine saw that, I'd say, so what do you think? And he was like, and to him, it was like, that is so much what I've seen from his point of view when Ramadan would come around. I'm doing what I'm always doing, but it's basically how everybody else is reacting to it. It's like, oh, there's some people like, oh, you're a Muslim, you never talk about it. It's like, well, this is, right. This is what I'm doing with my community. It's not really a show for you in that sense. And so it's just funny that when somebody, through other people's eyes, and that's also how, when you make reference to how other people relate to it, I think a lot of people, even outside of the specific identity of it, a lot of people feel like outsiders from time to time, depending on the situation. Yes. Like you said, the love story. I mean, a lot of people, when you're dealing with your relationship, people think about that. There's an in-law situation in 1 out of 30, which is a very specific Muslim situation. But if you're married, you have in-laws. And so that's a dynamic that is like fairly universal. So to answer your question, a lot of that, it wasn't like a concept of, oh, let me write this scene that does it like this. I'm just speaking to my life, but I'm learning as my craft as a writer continues. And I've had mentors tell me this along the way. It's like, the more specific you are to you, you will be surprised at how the audiences react to what this thing that you feel like you're the only person in the world who's experiencing this. But when the reality is, I mean, maybe the details are specific to you, but the emotion, people feel that all the time. So it's something I feel like I'm still learning with every project I do.
Yes. Thank you.
I mean, I guess you write what you know, right?
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry. Were you going, Nasha?
Okay.
I guess you write what you know, and particularly when what you know and what you've seen. I think for me, really, truly, what spoke to me was being at the intersection of Black and Muslim, and living a life like I had lived, where I've experienced probably an excessive amount of, I guess, police aggression, etc. I've been pulled over more times than I can count. I've been where cops are aggressive, they talk to you like you're nothing. I've had guns trained on me by police. And this last year or so, I've been dealing with a lot of that, through art, through therapy, particularly with the George Floyd movements and all of it. I was out marching, etc. So you see all that growing up. And at 14, I'm pushing carts at Kroger with a red vest on, and white woman locks her door and is looking at me like this, and so you get in your head that, oh, people are scared of me. Oh, this is how I'm going to be treated, right? So you deal with all that, and then 9/11 happens, and then you see how fast the discrimination ramped up for Muslim people. So now you're like, oh, I got a long Muslim name, right? And everywhere I go now, and everything that deals with travel, government elements, like I've been detained several times coming back to the US. I've been like, there was a time I couldn't send money on Western Union, because of my name. Like it was just random stuff like that. You wouldn't even think about, like trying to get my passport. It took like 6-8 months because I had to fill out like, several more documents that describe my whole family and where they worked and all of it. So all of these things, and I actually got a lawyer who told me that I was on some watch list because my name matched some. So like being at the center of both of those, having grown up being Black and experienced that, and then 9/11 happens, and now adding this extra element, it's come to the point where I have to tell these stories with the kind of ignorant that enacts these types of policies and this type of perception. Is how else are we going to show it, right? Like you're not ignorant about certain topics that have been expressed and shown through media in the last 100 years, right? 50 or 100 years, because you've had a myriad of stories about every facet of the white experience, right? Like every single one of them. And then those stories will then make you go do some research or read a book, etc. But when you have zero about a person like me, right. People are confused by that.
Yes.
People are afraid of that.
Right.
And so I've found that to be my experience. And, part of me is like, yeah, I want to make movies because I love doing it. I love the craft of it. I love cameras. I love how people look at them. I love finding the right shot, all of it. But part of me is also like, I'd love for people to be able to sit in their living room or the theater and watch this thing that could like say something to them.
Yes.
That could make them feel, and that could potentially change their perception about a thing.
Yes.
Maybe for the rest of their life.
Yes. But as artists, do you feel do you bristle against that? I think that there's something about it, and that this is something that, we have these conversations at the lodge all the time, where, so for one, there's some Black artists that feel like I feel a pressure that there's so many images that are out there about Black people that are negative. So I've got to give, the other side of that story. I've got to present us as heroes. And I've got there's some of that pressure. We had a panel last year that was about Indigenous peoples. And really where we see for Black people, it's been negative images. For Indigenous peoples, it's been the erasure of, a narrative. And then it's like they existed and now they don't. And I feel like even when I was, doing a lot of research to have this conversation with you, I was struck by there's just the absence of a Black Muslim, of a love story, of that. So I feel like my question, which I'll present, is, do you feel, as you're saying, Hassan, you feel like, yes, you want to tell that story, but do you also at times feel like that is a responsibility, that you want your art to just be your art without the pressure? So that's a question, honestly, for all three of you.
Right. I wanted to kind of go back to the other question too, but also address this one. Yeah. There's this quote, I think Maya Angelou said this, where she said, "There's nothing like bearing an untold story inside of you." Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's how Jen really emerged, is that I lived that. So it was like, it was years and years in the making, like from like the poetry I was writing as a teenager until now, like I'm still living in that. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't live without telling that story. Like it had to kind of come out of me, and it had to be presented to the world. I didn't feel like I have this responsibility to show a positive image of Islam. I felt like I had a responsibility to stay true to my story. And in staying true and specific to that story, I knew I could reach people who just couldn't tell their story or wanted to, but were ashamed or in fear, because I know what it feels like to feel ashamed and to feel confused and to be in several different worlds as a Black woman. to be sexualized and to be, listening to a Little Kim song in junior high and just be completely just disoriented, because that is so different from the world that I came from and the ideals that were like instilled in me. So I just felt like I had to visually render that type of confusion and that type of navigating different worlds, because it was so real. And I saw so many people doing that around me, but lacking the language or the ability to really talk about it. So you're just existing in a silence. And I think silences can really weigh so heavy on our mental health. So I think it was just really important to tell the story of Summer, a Black girl who, at first is trying to please her mother, but also builds a love for Islam, making salat, which is a beautiful act of meditation and uniting with a higher power. But at the other side of that, doesn't want to conform to certain tenets of the religion, which is very real for people. And I knew that I had to do that in a human way, in a way that wasn't about good or bad, but about gray areas and about people just existing in those areas, and how that's really what humanity is. We're not just good or bad. There's a lot of, flawed and complicated aspects to us as people. And I think the reception to the film and to those types of stories, you see it's warm and it's open, because people are yearning for just some humanity in an image of themselves.
Yeah, I don't necessarily feel a pressure. It actually motivates me, to be like, I've struggled with, and I think it's because I come from a very active sort of fight like background of where I grew up. I had to fight a lot, and I played sports. I played the most physical sport, football, so I'm used to just like, all right, let's get it done. Let's. So when it comes to like this movement we're in now, which is probably not probably, I think it's the biggest one since the civil rights movement. There were larger marches this summer than any time in the history of this country. And I grapple with like my part in that and wanting to be at the front of every single one of them. And then having to negotiate with myself and say to myself constantly, like, bro, this is your part of this movement. It is to be an artist within it. You're not the guy that needs to be on every stage screaming and marching. And I still went to some of the marches and I still was there, but that fulfilled a certain part of me to be with the community, and to feel the pain that we all were feeling. But ultimately, I'd do better to make something that speaks in a way that can move the conversation forward and move the culture forward. So to me, my mom is from Natchez, Mississippi, where the Klan used to ride and everyone would call each other and say, the Klan is riding tonight. And they would make sure their lights were, I don't know if she said they were on or off, but there were rules that you must, don't be out in the streets, don't do this. And that was just life, and I would see her, and for her to be bold enough to move from Natchez to Detroit and then like come from the Church of God in Christ and then decide to become Muslim, which was revolutionary for her. And for me to see photos of them back in the day marching, and it would always resonate with me. And I would always say to myself, well, what if it came today? What if this happened today? What would I do then? And I think I know my answer, I think I would keep being motivated to try to say something through the medium of film.
Yeah, I completely agree with what he's saying. Pressure is not the right word, I would say. Responsibility is a much stronger word, I think. I think it's interesting to hear Kasim talk about his background, because we have a similar thing. I'm personally born and raised in Kansas, but my parents both from Louisiana, and not just Louisiana, but rural Louisiana. Like my parents met at Grambling State University, so they're HBCU grads. And I remember as a kid going to my grandmother's house, or my great grandmother's house, which was literally like 3 rooms total, sitting on cement blocks and just kind of getting this history. And I was a child, but my dad's kind of explained to me, okay, do you see these trees? Do you see this big house where we used to come work? And I'm seeing it, but as I got older, I really started to get a deeper understanding of, oh, wait, he's not showing me this just as, oh, hey, these are, this is where, the white people live. There's like a lot of history that, you don't have to dig that deep to find out, oh, this was probably a plantation house. Like there's a reason that, if you go deep into like our family history, there's, my mother's one of 10, my dad's one of 3. And then, there's family in Houston and there's family. So it's where I'm not personally born in the South, but I feel Southern in the way that all of my family is from the South. I was such a city kid growing up. So in that way, but I say all that to say that responsibility was and I think it's also, in a lot of ways, it's a Black thing. It's almost in our DNA. It's like you don't even think about, do you feel responsibility? It was just always there. It's not even something that I had to be taught. It was just, you have this, you are part of like a big family, and you're a part of a big community. And always like respect that, don't disrespect that. That's one part of your question. Another thing, you mentioned my acting background. There was a quote, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but somebody asked Denzel at some point, do you feel a responsibility to kind of promote your personal religion in your films? And his response was to the effect of, my art is how I minister. And I remember I took that to heart. It's like, you know what, I love that because I feel the exact same way. My art is like my ministry. And it's when I can see his films, not every film, but a lot of them, I'll notice certain, Christian images. And I've always like admired that, okay, it doesn't always have to be, title screen, this, it doesn't have to always be a big thing, but it will always be there. And it will always be there in my film. So I do like the idea of being not a imam in the traditional sense, but, as thousands, millions of people can see my work through this, and through this way, I'm promoting this image of my community, and I'm promoting this image of what Black Muslims are, what Muslims are, what American Muslims are, that, as we're saying, it's not a completely wide image yet, but if I'm contributing to that in that way, I feel like this is how I minister for my community.
So I think my next question really is about, I think, why aren't there more of these stories? I know it's really like, it's, the reason why we're even having a panel like this, because there aren't enough. And so I really just want to get from your standpoint, not only why aren't there more, but, where do we go from here? How do we get it? It can't just be the 3 of you. And it's not just the 3 of you, but how do we get more of these authentic narratives, on our screens?
I think it's hard to be the first to do things,
Yeah.
Make the first few movies of Black Muslim people shows. I think this town always needs a reference, something that went and made 100 mil. Hey, what is this?
Right.
We know Black people, but we don't know this. I mean, Black films are just now in the last 5 years or so getting the opportunity to show the range of who we are as Black people, right? Like last 5-10 years, and so I think we're like sort of even behind that 8 ball in a way, because there's been so few. So I think it's a matter of time. It's a matter of continuing to push for it. I think, I actually don't have the answer to that. I think just more people willing to get behind these stories and understand that this demographic is extremely nuanced and interesting. And I mean, like, the fact that I could sit here and like recite verses from the Quran in Arabic, and I could sound like a guy from Egypt right now, that I learned to read Arabic when I learned to read English. That's random and interesting, and like, what, because you would never know that just upon seeing me. And that um and there's a lot of people in this country like that. So I don't know. It's just, we'll see.
Yeah, I want to add to that, just from experience when we were trying to get Jen made. A lot of times, we were pitching to different executives, with the exception of Muslim and, Bilal Stand or, other, those films, there was really no reference that these people had for this story at all. They would say things like, oh yeah, Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X, but there was no contemporary, they had no contemporary insight into a Black Muslim life. And so I think that made it really hard for them to visualize or understand what I was trying to do. But they did see an urgency just because that was a point where Trump was about to be elected. And they saw that this kind of anti-Muslim rhetoric and all this was reaching a fever pitch, but still weren't able to take a chance on funding a movie about, a Black Muslim girl and her mother. So I think that, there needs to be more people in these executive and higher up spaces who can try to understand or who represent the worlds that we're making to bring those worlds inside of that environment. We made Jen completely independent just because we knew that if we waited years to get it made, it might have not been made, and it might have been made in a way that sacrificed the integrity of my vision. Like the creative integrity of what I was trying to do might have been, it might have not come through if we had kind of taken a different direction. So I think we're in a time now where the landscape, the film landscape is opening up, and there are people who want to really take in these stories and foster them, but we still need more. We still need more because I think what happens is that we get Black Muslim characters or stories, and because we don't have that many, everyone wants that one story to be everything to everyone.
Right.
Yeah, and it's just, it can't be that. God. It just can't. It's like, this is a specific story, and it can't serve every Muslim's request. And even with One Night in Miami, I thought it's a beautiful film. I know there was some discussions within the Black Muslim community about certain nuances and certain representations that some people didn't vibe with. But I think the issue is that we just don't have enough, so that when these movies come out, everyone's looking to this one TV show, this one film to kind of satisfy everyone. But we have to look at, we don't do other films like that. White films, we don't have that. We don't say, oh, that film didn't represent, every single person. We just take it as a story. And I think that's where we need to get to, the point where we can just take this as a beautiful story about a specific experience, because there's so many Muslims in the world. And I think that's what's next for us. We need to push to that point.
Because you end up inadvertently becoming the spokesperson, and you're in interviews. I mean, I went through this with Muslim, and I actually went through a lot with this and almost didn't come back from it. Just the post-Muslim kind of, every interview is asking me about like terrorism and stuff. I'm like, bruh, what are you talking about? Like, I legit was on CNN, like answering these kinds of questions, right? Like, and in different countries, having panels and answering questions about these very things that I was not qualified to be. I was in my 20s.
You're an artist.
Right.
Like,
did
you
a
made
movie
a film
about me going to school, and like, 9/11 happened, and the movie wasn't about 9/11, but when I went to college and I was in college, and I look up on the screen and there's these buildings, and everyone's terrified. And my sister lived in New York, and we were all trying to get in touch with her. And that was from my perspective. I wasn't like making a political commentary on, on that topic. It was part of the film, and it's part of our history as Americans. But to be in these situations where you're meant to speak for a group of people that is wildly complex, and there's a lot of facets of the Muslim community. There's a Nation of Islam, there's Sunni Muslims, there's Shiite Muslims, there's the Tablighi Jamaat, which is like there's all of this, right? Ahmadi, like there's all of these facets, and they're asking me these questions. So I know exactly what that feels like, and and like you said, I hope we get to a point where our stories can be stories.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's being said. It's an uphill climb, but on the executive side, we just need more people on that end to say, please, because and it's been referenced, but even now, I can hear some executives saying there's not an audience for this. Well, everybody on this panel and everybody probably watching this know this is the audience. We know there's an audience for this. So that is just not a valid excuse. That's part one. But on the artist side, I would say, as we all know, like we can't wait for the executives to say, okay, we're ready for you to tell your story. Just tell your story the best way that you can for all the artists out there. And I see it all the time, but it's true advice. Like I wish when I was starting out, I would have had a 4K camera in my pocket all the time. So just, if you start small on the artist side, just start with what you have and just start there. Because craft is very important. I mean, it's not everything, but there is an element of like when you're thinking, and it's sometimes when your stuff is good, when your stuff is like really catching people's emotions, that doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt. So continue to work on your art, but also I do think, without sounding too, I'm not waiting all these people. Find a way to tell your story the best way you can now. And I would love for Midnight in Kansas to be this $100 billion thing, but I'm not waiting on that to happen. I'm looking at what do I have in front of me right now to tell the story that I want to tell the best way I can. So I want to be part of the system, but I'm also not, just based on history, I don't have this idealized view that, oh, tomorrow, so and so is going to say, hey, I want to tell a Black Muslim story. I think that's part of why we're here. Like that hasn't been our history. So I think just being practical about, I want to be at that table, but I feel like I want to say, as Ava says, make your own table. Make your own distribution, make your own. We have ways you can distribute your stuff now, and so that's a very exhausting thing. But I think, and I sound kind of cynical, but I'm an optimist. I was even thinking just this week that if you've told me in the past 12 months I've seen, Watchmen, Lovecraft Country, like just the genres that Black people are doing now, I would have never imagined that 5 years ago. Not that we can't do it, of course, but that, that studios are, giving us the freedom to do, different types of Black stories, as we're saying. So I do think we will get there, but I'm also saying that I'm very aware that it's a super uphill climb to get there. But on both sides, to cut it, put a point on it, on the industry side and on the artist side, we both have to be ready for like a lot of work to get there.
Yes. And the thing that I'll just say in closing is we need your authentic stories, and you three are definitely doing that and adding it. Thank you so much for this incredible conversation. I also want to thank the Muslim Public Affairs Council for, working alongside with Macro to bring this conversation to bear. I just know it's going to really be something that's going to just inspire so many people. And the thing that I'll say too is we've had the Macro Lodge for 4 years at Sundance, and this year is the first year that there's actually a Muslim house. So I think that there's wheels are turning and progress is being made. And I just am so happy for you three being really on the forefront of that and making sure that we're continuing in the right direction. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks for
Thank you so much.